Welcome everybody to the CanCertainty first webinar of 4, and we're going to explain a little bit more about that very shortly. My name is Bill Dempster, CEO of 360 Public Affairs. Had the great pleasure and honor to work with Bob Vick and the CanCertainty team on this. Bob, why don't I pass it over to you to give us a bit of context, and then I'll tag back in and introduce the panelists and give a little bit more logistical information to.
Sure. Thanks, Bill, and welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Bill said, he'll introduce the panel in a few minutes and review the agenda. But I first want to welcome everyone to this webinar, and also introduce next slide, Bill. The 4 topics that we're going to be covering over the next month or two. So today, of course, we're going to be looking at pCPA and provincial listings, and look specifically at how timelines affect patients. Then next, on December 13th, we're going to do a webinar on funding algorithms, and we're going to be looking at what goes into those decisions and how it affects patients there. And then we're going to be talking about quality adjusted life years, and how the last year or the year before, I think it was, the decision to establish one threshold affects patients in that area. And then we're going to go into the area of surrogate endpoints. Now, this webinar series is part of some other CanCertainty policy and advocacy initiatives. So, for example, at the recent annual scientific conference of the Canadian Association for Population Therapeutics, CanCertainty hosted a breakfast workshop called Early Stage Cancer Therapies: How Can Canadian Evaluators and Funders Adapt to Review Treatments with Surrogate Endpoints? Now, this was a really interesting and fabulous event where we used a modified Delphi method powered by a decision engine developed at Queen's University to get input from participants on how Canadian stakeholders in drug access and HTA and reimbursement need to adapt and prepare for the coming deluge of clinical trials that are designed with novel endpoints. An interesting little takeaway from that one is that CATH has asked us to report on the results of that session at an upcoming CATH staff meeting. But more importantly, next slide, Bill. Today's webinar is focused on time to patient, with a specific focus on the pCPA and provincial listings. So what we have here is this graphic. I'm sure a lot of you have seen it now. It's been used in a lot of different forums, but Canada's long and sequential process leads to some extended timelines for patient access to medicines. This infographic illustrates the complex and lengthy process for a drug to make it through to a patient. We see Health Canada, the licensing on the top platform. Then we see HTA, as we go down on the next platform. Then we see the pCPA and the negotiations roll down one more platform. And then we get down to the bottom there, where cancer agencies and public payers get involved in implementation before a drug is made available to patients. And on the right, of course, we see the private payer system, a little bit more of an expedited process. And of course, we see the PMPRB up there in the watchtower, a bit of a controversial role as of late, but that's a different topic. In the next slide, we see how lengthy time spent on many of these processes impacts patients. We all know that delayed time to patient is a consequential problem. And many of you will be familiar with a study published a couple of years ago by a few medical oncologists and epidemiologists in Ottawa, including Dave Stewart and Dr. Paul Wheatley-Price. The paper was called Potential Life Years Lost: The Impact of the Canadian Drug Regulatory and Funding Process in Canada. In that paper, they looked at 3 disease sites, lung, breast, and colorectal, and quantified the number of potential life years lost during the drug regulatory and funding processes in Canada. And as we can see, the impact is substantial, and it's largely driven by delays to funding. The conclusion, of course, is that we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of major initiatives that are required to address this major barrier to treatment access. Next slide, Bill. So our objective today is to elevate the knowledge of stakeholders on this topic of time to patient, and specifically on the role of pCPA and provinces, and and our goal is to inform future patient group advocacy on this issue. As a result, as an example of some other recent advocacy, CanCertainty raised this issue of time to patient in a recent open letter to health ministers. We shared it with the CanCertainty Coalition recently. In that letter, we urged health ministers to make as a priority the establishment of clear and more ambitious targets for public reimbursement of cancer medications. So, we'll get to the actual topic of pCPA in a moment, but I'm going to pass it on back to Bill to introduce the panel and review the agenda.
Thanks so much, Bob. So today's panel, the first of the series of four, is featuring Bob Bick. And Bob, you're looking fabulous today, by the way. Consultant and Can Certainty Campaign co-lead. And Bob, you barely need an introduction beyond that, but you do pretty much everything that's needed to improve access to medicines in general in Canada. So thank you for your work there. Dr. Judith Glennie is president of JL Glennie Consulting, Inc. And really, what to where you are now.
You're
Bill,
cutting
you're
off
breaking
there.
up a little bit.
Much.
Give you a bit of...
Barry Stein, President and CEO of Colorectal Cancer Canada. And I got to know Barry through a named case in Quebec in law school. It was Stein versus the province of Quebec. And actually a few people remember that, but that's how you got your start in this crazy world. And so I'll let you give a bit of a background about what led you to where you are now, and a little bit more about Colorectal Cancer Canada in particular. I should acknowledge as well some of the funders to Can Certainty to make this this series possible, and that's AbbVie Canada, Amgen Canada, Merck Canada, and Pfizer Canada. So thank you to those funders for supporting this series. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Bob, to walk us through a bit of the recent review and what's happening at pCPA on the ground. And just getting ready for this call, there were as many questions as answers in terms of you trying to dig through the different tea leaves that have been out there. So over to you to help read those tea leaves a little bit more, and then we're going to pass it over to Judy to talk about some of the data that you've helped pull together recently around access to cancer medicines and timelines in particular, and where the holdups are. And then Barry, we've been doing some other work as well on this area. I know you've got some ideas for how to tighten things up. So you're going to bat clean up on this with no slides as we move into Q's and A's, but you'll be the first at bat to be able to make some sense of this after we pass it through Bob and Judy. So Bob, back to you.
Sure. Next slide. So, we've decided again, to focus today on the pCPA and the provincial implementation process. Why? Well, there's a pragmatic consideration. First of all, there's a lot of areas where timelines are affected, but we thought we should focus on one of them as opposed to spreading ourselves too thin. But also, we looked at some of the impending changes that are taking place at PCA that present both risk and opportunity with respect to treatment access and time to patient. So, what are those changes? Well, pCPA in 2019 engaged a consultant to do an assessment of pCPA and to inform its revitalization. And in the subject areas that they reviewed were their role, scope, and mandate, and also their capacity, governance, and accountability, and some issues around negotiation timelines and decision making. Next slide, please. So after this the strategic review by a consultant, the pCPA's Governing Council decided to focus on three key areas: governance and organizational structure, strategic management, and operational management. The one that we're going to be looking at today, next slide, Bill, is their focus on the governance options that they're going to move forward on there. So ultimately, the consultant recommended, and the pCPA Governing Council agreed with, was that they wanted to turn pCPA into a standalone organization. The rationale was that a separate organization would allow them to centralize its operational authority and ensure its governance and accountability are fully aligned. And it would also provide them the opportunity to actually house all their staff and negotiating resources under one roof. Now, this, like I said, I think there's opportunity here and there's risk here. I think one of the issues that we actually have is that there's not been a whole lot of outreach and engagement with the stakeholder community on these potential changes. I know that at the end of Judith's presentation, I'm going to be challenging her with some of these risk and opportunity questions. And I know that she's got a few thoughts around that we're going to investigate. And hopefully everyone involved today will also start bouncing some questions around that as well. But I think that's kind of the context today of why I think we should focus on pCPA as a sort of a strategic advocacy opportunity. Over to you, Judith.
Over to you, Judy. Yeah.
You're on mute.
I unmuted myself earlier, I guess. So thanks very much, Bob, and to the CanCertainty team for providing this opportunity. What I'm going to do today is share very high-level results from some work that I did with colleagues at Morse Consulting related to listing timeframes specific to oncology products, and we'll go from there. Next slide, please. So just in terms of background, one could argue about all of this, but I think it's fair to say that bodies like Health Canada and both of our HTA bodies have put effort into accelerating their review processes and HTA reviews with parallel reviews, et cetera, and given opportunities to companies to accelerate through those processes. We do, however, still have a lot of challenges at the later stages of the process, so pricing negotiations through pCPA, as well as at the provincial level. Lots of delays at both those stages, resulting in obviously delays to patient access to new medications. And the details, so that basically led to a project that Sherry and Lana and I did and published earlier this year, and Bob will share and follow up to the session. And it was really driven by the fact that, Ontario specifically had been traditionally a leader in oncology listings, and that really had changed significantly in terms of challenges being identified and getting new oncology products listed in a timely manner. So that really prompted a deeper dive and the high-level results that you're going to see today. Next slide, please. So our first look was to look at pCPA itself, and this slide gives you sort of that time frame between the completion of the HTA process and the completion of the pCPA process, and how long was that taking. And we looked at a period of 3 years, and as you can see, the average, the yellow dots really don't change all that much. The average is about 250 to 300 days to get through that pCPA process, but the range has increased significantly, particularly on the maximum side. So up to 800 days in some cases, as few as 10 days in other cases, but high degree of range. During this process, or during this period, particularly in April of 2020, pCPA introduced a prioritization process. And that really was very much a factor in increasing this range and the variability. And that variability, of course, leads to a great deal of uncertainty for patients and obviously companies. Next slide, please. When you look at a provincial level, same time frame, same kinds of data. Bottom line is you see lots of variability from year to year, as well as lots of variability amongst provinces. And it really doesn't, that time to listing. This is the time frame from completion of pCPA negotiations to actual listing within the jurisdictions. Again, you see a lot of variability. Some might argue that in the 2020 timeframe, you can see some improvements, but the reality is there was improvements at the provincial level in 2020 because of prioritization at pCPA. So fewer products were finishing pCPA processes, which means that fewer products were had to be listed in the provinces. So the workload at the provincial level changed. And so that really is the best explanation for why there were improvements in many, not all, but many provinces during that 2020 period. Next slide, please. But that high level analysis really didn't give us a good sense of what was going on. So what we did was a case study in Ontario specifically, looking at timelines for drugs that were being, again, had completed the HTA process, completed the pCPA process, and either were completed or were in the queue in Ontario, and compared that over time and in some cases across jurisdictions. And that's the kind of information I'm going to share with you right now. So bottom line is, you know, of the 31 products that were listed that we looked at during this time frame, the average time between pCPA completion and Ontario listing was 4.5 months, or 137.4 days, with a range of 9 to 460 days. And we'll come back to that particular 460-day example. We looked at whether or not COVID had an impact, because COVID hit during the middle of all of this. While there was a slight increase in the amount of time for processing of files, it really wasn't that significant. It didn't double the amount of time, but there was about a 10% increase in the amount of time for processing of these files at the Ontario level. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, and we're not going to go through each one of these, but it gives you some, and all of this information is in the article that I referred to and that Bob will share with you. So I'm just going to pull out a few examples here. And just looking at, for instance, the third product down, gemtuzumab, which is a product that's used in acute myeloid leukemia. It took Ontario 460 days to list that product, whereas in Saskatchewan, 81 days, and Alberta didn't list it, although there may be some reasons behind that, because this is a product that gets started for use in hospital. And in fact, that was the big issue. In Ontario, there was no policy vis-a-vis funding of drugs that need to be started in hospital, but then are continued in the outpatient environment. And that was a key driver of the delay in Ontario. I must say, though, that is a policy issue that has existed for at least 5 years. So, you know, they basically sat on solving a policy issue for 5 years until they came to some conclusion. If we look at the crizotinib one, which is kind of the fifth one down, crizotinib and ROS1 positive non-small cell lung cancer. Ontario, 259 days, other provinces about half that time. So again, what's the issue here? Why is it that other provinces can get this done faster than Ontario can? Everybody has the same volume of drugs coming at them out of pCPA. Everybody has, all these drugs have the same issues in terms of, do they need a new companion diagnostic, as is the case with the ROS1 testing. But all these other jurisdictions seem to be able to deal with these issues. And Ontario, not always, but very often, is lagging behind other jurisdictions in terms of getting these drugs, taking them from the pCPA completion to final listing within the jurisdiction. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to skip this one because it's just more examples, and I kind of want to get to the bottom line. So bottom line here is we've got a lot of variability, both at pCPA as well as provincial listing processes. And that doesn't matter whether it's an oral drug or an IV oncology product, it just doesn't really matter. And then when we look specifically at what we learned from the Ontario case study, is that Ontario, frankly, has frequent delays in time to listing compared to other jurisdictions. And I'm, you know, and that's laid out quite clearly in that time to listing paper that I referred to. There don't seem to be any really specific identifiable reasons for why Ontario is different, quote unquote. But we do know that at the end of the day, this creates a lot of uncertainty for patients as they're waiting for new medications. And these are products that are already recommended by the HTA process. In my humble opinion, everything that happens after the HTA process is all administrative in nature. pCPA is all about finding a price and finalizing the criteria. And provincial level, it's all about just getting the agreement, the legal agreement between the company and the ministry, so that then, and putting it on the formulary so that the patient can get access. And those are all very much administrative processes. Nothing truly fundamentally changes for the vast majority of drugs once they leave the HTA process. Next slide, please. So what's going on here? This is a build, and Bill's going to take it right to the end. Great, thanks very much. Very high level. and I'm doing a project now that is really investigating this in more depth, but these were the things that we identified back in our paper. And it could be that in some cases, some jurisdictions are not looking at implementation issues in advance. They are waiting until pCPA has finished everything that they need to do, and then they start to look at, have we got funding for the diagnostic, and making sure that that is in place. Have we figured out what we're going to do with sequencing, or with combination use? Have we figured out, or have we looked at whether we need to change listing criteria for other drugs? All those things are, in some cases, being left until after the pCPA process is completed. There are other issues like policy considerations, and I talked about the example with Mylotarg and the inpatient versus outpatient funding, and the fact that that had not only not been addressed in advance for that product, but hadn't been addressed for over 5 years. And then in some provinces, we do have a budget impact. So, is it that some provinces need to get budget approval, additional approvals to fund a drug moving forward? That's not the case in Ontario, but it is in some jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So for me, the bottom line and what I've learned through all of this process and continue to look at is, there's a real need for a shift in the focus of people who are taking products from the HTA output and getting them across the line to actual patient access. And we need to, get these people to realize that they need to start focusing on patient needs and stop being so focused on meeting their administrative requirements. And I think that is a key learning for me, at least, from this initiative. And I'll leave it at that, and we can talk some more later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Judy, for bringing forward the data, and Bob for your earlier review of why this is so important in terms of time to access. Something that we all heard Dr. David Stewart say that because he works mainly in lung, that a 1 week delay in getting onto treatment for certain lung cancers at certain stages leads to 4% of those patients dying every week. So bringing these, the time to patient what in terms of actually improving these timelines.
Sorry, Bill, you were breaking up, so we didn't get that last question, if there was a question there.
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, Barry, why don't you react first to the presentations? And secondly, what's the low-hanging fruit that you would like to pick off the tree? Go ahead, and I'm going to try to get a more stable internet connection in the meantime. Thanks.
Sure. Did you want me to go in to talk about the work that we're doing as well, or did you want to save that for later, or just react now?
You're welcome to, because I think it actually speaks to the first question, which is the low-hanging fruit. What can we do to actually get to the patient faster? So go ahead.
Good. So I'm glad you asked me to respond to Judy and to Bob, and not to yourself, because we didn't hear what you had to say. So, but I could imagine. So thanks very much, of course, for the invitation to be here today and to speak with Judy and Bob and yourself about this important subject, which really impacts patient every day of our lives. And all of us, as I said in numerous meetings, one day we'll be patients if we're not already. So it impacts all of us. I would guess, one of the things that we started to look at, and we are having two, to begin with, closed door sessions, Chatham House rule hackathons based on the similar methodology that Bob was referring to. The first, which we held on November 14th of this year, I should say. And the idea is just to look at the existing system and what can we do with the existing system and tweak that, so to speak, to see if we can reduce the time to patient by about 50%. So that's a big ask. How can we look at the system, cut whatever we do, and put that out to the payers, the people in the health technology assessment agencies, to other panelists that included physicians, patient groups, of course, and researchers in this area, as well as consultants. So we really had a full gamut that included various provinces from across the country and all the parties, all the stakeholders in this the whole scheme of health technology assessment. And even at the regulatory, we had some Health Canada people too. So I won't be able to quote exactly what they said. I can only say what I said from it, but I will give you some top level parts. So first of all, just to respond to the pCPA part, I'll tell you what I said in that. And I said, we can have to look at some very novel ways of dealing with each category. And we say the pCPA because that could take about 50% of the time to patients. So that's a very important part of the process, whether it's standalone or not. But what we have to do is say, can the work of pCPA start earlier in the process? Why do we have to wait for a recommendation? Yes, there may be some wastage along the way, but we'll save tons of time by starting those that work earlier on in the consultation process. And secondly, we want the best for patients. By way of example, we want to see the patient support programs continue throughout the negotiation process. This is a place where patients really, are held hostage, if you will, to the process. But we need to have equity in negotiations. So with the new targeted approach, negotiation approach, to limiting sort of the back and forth between pCPA or between the negotiating parties, I don't like to see, as they say, the parties, the pharma go home with their drugs and nobody benefits from this process and there's no deal made. So I would suggest that one possibility might be binding arbitration in that process within a given period of time. So you have a certain period of time to negotiate. If you don't make it, then it goes to binding arbitration, which the parties have to agree in advance. And to make it equitable, because the drug company or sponsors of the trials initially may be funding the drug during this process, we have to ensure that retroactively they get reimbursed at that either price determined by arbitration or the negotiated price. So that's just one idea on perhaps limiting the time just on the pCPA actual administrative part and the negotiation process. It won't change, obviously, the time for a province to pick it up at the end. That's another avenue to look at. But that's just the type of thing that we've discussed. And we prioritize different issues, starting in terms of tweaking the system, starting at the Health Canada and PNPRB stages, looked at CADA and pCPA and so forth, and analyzed each one, and then create a bucket for other things that we may not have considered that can help to reduce the timeframes. So that's just a very top level types of things, but I could tell you in that process, one of the key factors that came up was how we should start to look at this process as one process and not look at it in silos as Health Canada, PNPRB, CADA, and pCPA, et cetera. We should take down those silos and start working at a much earlier date and blend the type of work that goes on through that process. And that came out very clearly at every stage of it. The second hackathon, which we'll be holding at the beginning of December, and we hope to have the report in publishable form ready for the beginning of December. But the second one will be on sort of reimagining the system, taking a look at other systems in countries, be it in Germany, in France, in Italy, Spain, or the UK, most likely, and see what can we find from these other systems that would ameliorate our own system in Canada. So it would be nice to say, oh, they have a better system, let's just replace it, with our system in Canada, but it's likely not realistic given our jurisdictional issues and so forth. But we can take a look at some aspirational comments, for example, by the NHS in the UK, which take a look in a global statement as to what we want in our country, whether it be economically, clinical trials, development, investment, access for patients, and obviously leading to improved outcomes with effective treatments at a reasonable price, and then reverse engineer. Let's take a look at what we can benefit from these other countries, reverse engineer what we do, and then come up with some innovative ideas. That would be the subject of the next one. We don't pretend that this is going to be the solution to every problem, but the idea is to give all parties, wherever they come from, the opportunity to be innovative. When I say innovative, I mean not necessarily to tweak something, to be novel in the way they tweak it, but to really take a look and recreate what can be done. And that's where we're going with that.
Thanks, Barry. This is a very interesting and timely discussion, and I want to bring it back to Judy and Bob in terms of you mentioned the patient support programs that are basically keeping patients on medicine through the negotiations process. Judy, is there an issue there for Ontario, for instance? Are they taking advantage of potentially some of the contractual issues around what's said in the letter of intent in order to be able to delay a budget spend? I mean, I don't want to ascribe motives or motivation, but I do notice in Quebec, they have a time to listing goal of, I think, 30 or 45 days, much shorter. So they are potentially, giving up access to that free, or I shouldn't say free medicine, I should say the company is investing in that medicine for that time. Is there something there that would potentially resolve some of the issues that you mentioned about Ontario?
I mean, bottom line is, if Ontario had targets, yes, it would resolve a lot of things. But I think, I would not want to say, and I don't know that no one would ever say it. So I can't say that there's any evidence that Ontario is relying on the fact that there are PSPs. Certainly the smaller jurisdictions, I've heard them say that they appreciate PSPs because it does allow for them to get through their processes and allow patients to have access while they are getting through their processes. But, when I have those kinds of discussions with smaller jurisdictions, they're still doing their damnedest to get through those processes as quickly as possible because they feel that it is important for patients to get access, and that the HTA body has deemed that this is an important drug. So they're trying to do whatever they can, and they see PSPs as an important tool. And I may be misinterpreting what Barry said, and unfortunately wasn't able to participate in the hackathons, but I certainly think that even something like a policy wherein whatever support companies did provide through the PSP gets reimbursed or gets addressed through the LOI, I think would be something that's fair, because it is true that companies are holding, supporting those patients while as we go through what is a purely administrative process. And that needs to be part of it. I'm not aware of any deals that have done that. There may be some, we just don't know. But I certainly think as a policy, that would certainly be a good way to go. I think it's a great idea.
Well, I just want to, comment on the PSP part of it. I mean, we know that some drug companies, have put some limits on the timelines that they're willing to continue to offer PSP, post HTA. We've also seen numerical caps on some of those programs where they say we'll fund, 150 patients between now and where we think it's reasonable for a deal to be struck. So I think there is perhaps some reliance on those PSPs, but we heard at the CORD conference a couple days ago that Canada is quite unique in this area. That the PSPs are not an international standard. They're very unique to Canada, and it's an anomaly that I think quite possibly is being taken advantage of by our payers. But I want to switch gears just a little bit, Judith. I mean, so I want to talk a little bit about pCPA's aspirations to be a standalone agency. So for the benefit of the people on the line today, the current mechanism for pCPA is that it's a fairly small staff that relies on, for every negotiation, it relies on lead provinces to take the lead on a negotiation, and they're often allocated to, you know, to a certain area of expertise. You know, where if they've negotiated you know, a drug for RCC in the recent past, they might get allocated the next drug for RCC because of their experience in that therapeutic area or in that disease site. The aspiration that we're seeing right now from pCPA and the Governing Council is that they want to be a standalone agency. Now, I mentioned at the outset that this, I think, poses both opportunities and threats. An opportunity because we saw during COVID that because of the reliance on provinces, you know, there was a slowdown in a lot of things. They basically said, we're only going to do priority targets right now. We've got to reallocate staff resources to COVID response. So we said, wow, you know, wouldn't it be better if pCPA actually had all its own you know, dedicated staff to handle everything else? But there is a risk. And Judith, I know that on a conversation we've had one-on-one, you identified that risk. And I was wondering if you could elaborate what that risk might be and how we might address that risk in advocacy and policy work with these organizations.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think conceptually, moving pCPA to be an organization that works more efficiently, more effectively, has performance standards, meets those performance standards. I think those are all things that conceptually people can agree with. But I think it's a bit of be careful what you wish for. If we start moving leads on negotiations out of the hand, especially in oncology, out of the hands of people who actually know these diseases, because they not only are the pharmacy lead in their jurisdiction, but they also are involved in patient care, and they are very closely tied to their clinicians. So they have usually a very deep understanding of the diseases themselves. And that makes them, frankly, much more nimble to be able to work through negotiations. One, understand what the criteria that came out of CADTH mean at a patient level, how to operationalize those at not only their cancer center, but within the negotiation process, what that means from patient numbers and volumes, et cetera. And so losing that expertise and handing that all over to someone in a pCPA office who has no clue about oncology and treatment, et cetera, I think is, that worries me a lot. And I think I'll just, so making sure that there continues to be that tie to strong expertise as part of the negotiation process is critical, because negotiations are not just numbers. You know, there are nuances vis-a-vis, just understanding what's going on, what those criteria mean as they translate to a disease and number of patients and how the system works. And people who don't work in that environment, don't understand that environment, will never get that. And that's dangerous.
Are there basically saying the clinical expertise that's afforded by some of these provincial pharmacy leads, et cetera, still needs to somehow be a part of this, whether it's, but so you're saying central, but not totally centralized is kind of what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, there needs to be, whether it's giving some resources that are funded by pCPA, but to the provinces to support those activities or to offset the activities of those pharmacy leads. Something along those lines, but those, cutting those people out of the process would be, and not having them have a major say in driving those negotiations, I think would be foolish.
This is really interesting. One of our questions that we were thinking about putting out to this group was, have we lost or are we losing something with PCODER, the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review, coming into CADTH formally in 2013. I think it's been a while since that happened. And since then, the processes for all the different single drug reviews have been harmonized across blood products, across the common drug review, and we still have the PCODER Expert Review Committee. Are there any lessons learned from that transition that the pCPA office, if it is going to spin out, to just build on what you're saying, Bob and Judy, and maybe back to Barry, you know, and Barry, you sort of challenged it. Can we reimagine something? Because in some ways it seems we keep on iteratively adding to the machine, and the machine is a very complex one that is sequential, that goes from Health Canada down to patients. Whereas back, I think, you know, when some of us started in this business and this policy area, it was provincial decisions. It was relatively straightforward, and now we have multiple flow charts at 3 or 4 different areas, and we keep on adding to them. So I want to bring it back to you know, Barry's challenge to the group is, you know, can it be reimagined? Should cancer have a specific, you know, expertise and review system where people really understand it? And, you know, what are some of the obstacles to getting there? And what were some of the success factors that you know, made pCoder so distinctive and I think led to some of the issues that the positive issues that you were trying to raise, Judy, in terms of the cancer specific expertise? Go ahead.
Just one comment, because I don't want to hog things. I mean, I think there's a way that, you know, pCoder, when it was integrated, I was one of those who was very concerned about it, as were many people on the line. And I think one of the good things is that pCoder has influenced the way that the other parts of CADA do things. So we now have clinician input on non-oncology files, which didn't exist until October 2020. We have a much stronger engagement of clinicians, even on the pCoder side. We have clinician panels that are now put together for certain kinds of things. So I think there's been an expansion through our HTA processes of the understanding of the value of having, you know, that high level of expertise involved in these processes. It's still not perfect, but it's better. And so, yes, I think there are some learnings, you know, that could translate. The other caveat I'd have is, yeah, we're talking about oncology, but the same kinds of issues arise in other therapeutic areas, rare diseases. You need that expertise, you know, and other therapeutic areas. So just to flag that this is not just for oncology that this is important to a pCPA, it's for many other diseases as well.
There's actually in CBC News today, I think, yeah, no, I'm not on mute. That's good. In Thunder Bay, there's a cancer patient who's got a very rare form of cancer that needs access to an immunotherapy that's not indicated for that specific kind of cancer. It's indicated for 25 other kinds of cancers, but not that one. And it's a real issue for that patient. Quebec has the Patient d'Exception program, which would probably allow a separate clinical panel to provide access to these rare cases. Barry, you're based in Quebec. Are there lessons from sort of the Quebec approach? I mentioned it earlier in terms of the target for faster timelines, but they also have this safety valve there for exceptional cases where it might not make sense for the manufacturer to even apply for that indication that would only pick up 5 or 6 patients across the country in a given year. It seems like we need a concept of equity and access to a different clinical panel sometimes to get access to some of these rare forms of cancer too. Is there something there, Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Patient d'Exception program in Quebec works very well in those exceptional cases, although they are a little bit more tight than they used to be on it, for sure. And also when we look to, you know, to the UK and look at the Special Drug Fund for these types of cases. And I think those are the types of things that we have to start looking at when we start reimagining the system. But just back for a moment to the other points that we were raising about standalone for a pCPA and so forth. I think that what we need to first of all is not to just do this piecemeal and take a look at one organization or one part of the process when trying to figure out how to reduce delays as a whole and have a more improved system. We have to say, look at all the different levels. How do we uncomplicate this very complicated process and lengthy process with often you see replication of things that need not be duplicated, certain drugs that go through the process that overburden the system that need not go through this process. You know, the Me Too types of drugs, biosimilars in some cases. We have to figure out ways at every stage of the process on how to uncomplicate the system. My biggest fear is that if you create a organization such as pCPA, make it standalone, you hire people, you start developing it, it becomes an organization which tends to want to protect itself and grow, and then becomes one of the barriers itself to the process. So I think really, if we're going to reimagine something, we have to think about uncomplicating the system and simplifying the process. What is essential, though, are the people, to have the right people who have the capabilities, as Judy said, who understand what needs to be understood, not just from a negotiation process, and you need strong negotiators on both sides, but they have to understand from the patient perspective. At the end of the day, to your point in Thunder Bay, the point of the whole system is to ensure that the patients get effective treatments in a timely manner, the most effective treatments in a timely manner. And that's the point of the whole system in the end result. And sometimes, you know, while at heart everybody wants that, we forget that because they're tied up in the rigidity and the obligations of their job. So,
Yeah,
as I said,
there's a good idea online. The co-founder of CanCertainty, I'm going to prioritize her. We're going to move from the at issue panel right now with a special nod to Rosemary Barton and Peter Mansbridge, to the cross-country checkup with Ian Hannamansing, because we've got some amazing folks tagging in online, and thank you. But Deb Maskins is asking, has anyone done work to make the time to patient clock more visible? And that's getting to what you were talking about, Barry. How can we make some of your work, Judy, and Morse Consulting, et cetera, more visible? Back in the day, I remember when Mona Sabrawal was running PCODER, she would actually do annual reports and say, this is what happened to the recommendations that came out. We don't see those reports anymore. And it doesn't make the provinces look good necessarily, but is there anything that you're aware of, or that Bob, you're up to, that would potentially have that clock more visible and out there?
I think it's an excellent idea. You know, to actually do this. I mean, even the Ontario Public Drugs Program hasn't been publishing their reports for a few years. So we have a transparency problem in a number of areas as far as, you know, who's doing what and where. And you know, like you said, I think transparency is a huge problem overall.
We have a real love-in for Quebec coming online as well. MJ, thanks for tagging in there, noting that every resident in Quebec must have prescription drug coverage, and that at least in the breast cancer area, it seems like they have access to more breast cancer drug options. So that's terrific. And then an earlier question from Katie, what can we learn about the prioritization process in pCPA that added a range and variability in 2020? And this would be over to you, Judy. Like, what happened in 2020? Did the world close or something like that? Was COVID an issue, or what was the factor?
It started with COVID. So first and foremost, it was COVID. That, you know, because the drug programs in all provinces were pulled into, you know, it was an all hands on deck across all government, all parts of the departments of health in particular, but other government departments. So, you know, that was a big issue. But later on, they have since formalized it within their process. So you can go onto the pCPA website and you can get access to their procedures document. And it's just a little box that says, you know, provinces will prioritize, you know, which drugs or may prioritize, you know, the drugs that they add on to the list. And I don't know that I'd have to go back and look at it. I'm not sure how transparent it is in terms of what factors they take into consideration, but sure, you know, for instance, a lot of the drugs that go through this targeted negotiation process are frankly commodity drugs that are used in inhalers for COPD or asthma, or yet another beta blocker for hypertension, or another statin for cholesterol. And it is very much a take it or leave it kind of a scenario. I don't know what other drugs are going through that process because it's not transparent, frankly, to my knowledge, at least, what drugs are undergoing that part of the pCPA process.
And it's not even clear if it's voluntary or not.
No, and it's not voluntary. You are told, you know, that you are quote unquote invited to participate, and that it is, as you said, it's a take it or leave it kind of scenario. So, but you know, they'll look at things like, are there, in my mind, this is how they are prioritizing. Are there any other drugs in that therapeutic area? Are there any other treatments? I'm sorry, but that kind of makes sense. We would want them to prioritize, frankly, on that basis, so that important new drugs where there's never been a drug before should probably be prioritized. The degree of clinical impact is probably a consideration. There are several others, I'm sure. Frankly, ones where they can save money may be a consideration. So again, I'm not sure how, and I'll look it up, but how clearly that's outlined in those procedures. But there is very much a step where they do that. I'll double check.
I mean, we've been looking at the prioritization issue for quite a while now, and Health Canada does it already. They have 300 days for regular drugs and then an expedited review process, which is 6 months. However, when a developer is investing, well over $500,000 in Health Canada and then CADA submission fees, and then they get to pCPA and they're deprioritized, there should be some kind of guardrail to say, we will get to you at some point by X. And if it means that we need to invest a lot more in a standalone pCPA agency to make sure that they can actually process everything. I also want to just come back to somebody in the webinar chat that brought forward an issue around the binding arbitration, or really pushing them hard to get to yes. There are some complexities around some medicines that may, be moving towards an innovative agreement or a framework agreement or something like that. So I think, Barry, that's something you maybe take offline to figure out.
I think managed entry agreements are something that Europeans have a lot more experience at, and I think that is something that can form part of the process. But remember, when I was referring to that, I'm talking about the existing process right now and what should be done and what seems to be, potentially to tweak the existing system. If we want to reimagine what we're talking, I mean, we could talk about, conditional approval subject to the collection of real world data, and we can, talk about those type of processes, which really would make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. Just want to bring forward, because this might not make it into the audio webinar that's being recorded. And again, MJ, thanks for bringing this forward. A breast cancer treatment for a subtype with a huge unmet need took 110 days at the consideration phase. And the question is, was that because no lead province put up their hand? And now it's been 80 days of active negotiation so far. So I think there's some frustration from people who are, on the outside, but have people phoning them saying, look, I need this potential treatment because my oncologist says it's the right one to use. What should happen there? Is the leader of the patient group supposed to say, oh, I'm sorry, the negotiations are ongoing, we'll just watch the website? Is that good enough? Or is there some other kind of thing to make sure that these things get through faster, maybe even conditionally? What's the opportunity for the concept of a conditional listing? I know there's some issues around negotiations there, but any thoughts on that?
I mean, I kind of commented on it in one of the questions, but I mean, other jurisdictions are doing conditional listings. There are examples of it in the UK. They did it with Tagrisso in one of the indications for Tagrisso in lung cancer, with a deal that, and they did it prior to even the HTA review. So there are examples where they've even forgone the HTA review because it was clear that the impact of this drug was so impressive. It's a matter of not only political will, but also payer will. Payers have resisted doing, whether it's conditional listing recommendations out of HTA or conditional listing agreements, pending HTA review or anything along. They've resisted. They don't want to set precedent. That's what they're all about. We don't want to set a precedent. And so finding ways to make them whole, meaning protect them, if one of these kinds of agreements is going to move forward, that's, for them, it's all about risk and mitigating their risk and making sure that they are seen to be fair to patients and that the rules are clear. But, the biggest thing that payers hate to do is take drug away from someone. And that's the risk that they they want to avoid. And so that's, I think, why a lot of these conditional listing, conditional reimbursement, yada, 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 have been have stalled, basically, despite even HTA bodies saying this should be recommended conditionally with further data collection. They're afraid.
I'll put it
It's a
in
bit of a cop-out when you say that, I mean, when the end result is that you're trying to help the patient. So if the drug is not effective, that's the reason why you're taking it away. So, there may be some grandfathered, situations which could come in, where a patient could continue with the drug for a specific reason, but that's part of the deal. If you're going to get early access, then you have to agree to the drug being removed. And, that's the deal, right? If you want to get the early access. So
You're singing to the choir, Barry.
I know that. That's most fun that way.
So, this has been done, and we'll take this. There's a great poster that UK NICE put out about their managed access program. I think 90% of the drugs, the 22 drugs that have gone through that since 2016, were in cancer or in oncology. I think there were about 22 or 23 medicines. 86% of them said basically clinical, too uncertain to say yes to. However, we're going to put them into this evidence generation track. And at the end of a certain period of time, the majority of them, I think 19 out of those, got brought into the regular reimbursement. So there's an example of where it can work, and we'll, I'll see if I can put that into the chat or into the follow-up for this. I want to take this up to a higher level, because that's where some of our Q's and A's are going around, the federal transfers to the provinces and the request that they actually share data, because we're talking about transparency of data in terms of time, listings, et cetera, and reimbursement and outcomes. Is the health system so strained right now and basically falling apart in many parts of the country that now is the time to actually get some of these fundamental changes to pCPA through in a way that will meet the needs of Canadians? Is now the time to get this? And is there some relevance to the other health system strains that I referenced, like 25, 30-hour wait times at hospitals? Nobody has a family doctor anymore. We're on the cusp of some pretty fundamental change more broadly. Is this the time potentially to try to bring something like Barry was suggesting, to reimagine things? And I'll bring it back to Bob and Judy to comment on that first.
Well, I mean, I think with respect to pCPA, I think well, in the context, they're actually considering, some big changes there that provides some opportunity. Somebody in the chat though did point out, like, was there any engagement leading up to this decision to become a stand, or not? As I only go so far as say it's a decision, but this movement towards being a standalone agency, and I don't recall being, seeing any engagement opportunities as a stakeholder to participate in those conversations. So part of our challenge right now is to elbow ourselves to the table there, to be a part of any discussions about how pCPA might reconstruct itself and how it evolves. We have to be a part of those conversations. So I don't think that opportunity really exists significantly right now. And then after that, we have to start talking about substance, right? Like, then what is it that we'd like to see them become, and what form we want to take them to. We have to get ourselves at the table first, which is, I think, part of our next step.
Judy, is now the time to reimagine things?
Why not? I mean, I think you've got, as Bob has said, you've got opportunities at the pCPA level. You've got opportunities, I think, really just everybody across the country is kind of rethinking their health systems, for better or for worse. I think the challenge is the leadership, and I just don't see anybody, the changes that I see happening from one jurisdiction to another are frankly knee-jerk reactions as opposed to a real plan. And having, whether it's the CanCertainty group or a larger group that they're affiliated with, taking on a leadership role to say, we need to step back and rethink this. And that coming from the patient voice, I think would be a good start.
Yeah, there's a bit of a call out there, and this is Barry. I'm going to let you have the last word as the patient. But in the UK, NICE actually has multi-sectoral leadership. It's not just from government. It's from the developer world. It's from the patient world. And the same thing in Australia. In their expert committees, even have people with this background and expertise, and often they're more open. So Barry, the sun is shining down on you. This means that you're a great idea is coming to help you close it as you close your blinds. Yeah. Last word to you.
So very briefly, I mean, it's always a time to reimagine. It has to be a dynamic system. So whether it's now and at any time in the future, we can never be satisfied with the situation that exists for a lengthy period of time. We always have to be trying to figure out how these new drugs, because they are new types of drugs, where we only are going to have phase 2 data in many cases, really a personalized type of treatment. So this is a necessity. I'll just close to say, yes, the voice can come from patient groups, it should come from all of us, but it has to come from the top of these organizations who actually want to effectuate change, like in any organization. If we don't get the buy-in at the top, it's going to be really hard to bring about any change. So I do think that through CPIN, the Canadian Personalized Healthcare Network, we are working with CADA on terms of understanding data better so that it can be trusted for real world evidence. And we have to have more initiatives like that, where the high level people in these organizations are engaged and are willing to be engaged, as they should be, in order to improve the system on a continual basis.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Barry. I'm going to do a final screen share for folks and pass it back over to Bob. Judy, thank you for sharing your expertise. I always enjoy, I read your articles, but then it's nice to actually have somebody walk through, okay, how it came together, what are some of the insights. So thank you so much for doing that today and always. Bob, do you want to tell us about the next webinar in mid-December?
Sure. So thanks everyone thanks everyone on the panel, and thanks for all our participants today, for everyone who dialed into this webinar. So our next webinar is on Tuesday, December 13th, where we're going to be talking about funding algorithms and the most recent process. We've all experienced how this has kind of evolved and changed over time from the days at CAPCA, but we're going to talk about what goes into these decisions and how it affects clinical practice. And we'll talk about some of the, what I'll characterize as some of the current problems with the current algorithm process. I'm actually involved right now again on working on an algorithm response from Kidney Cancer Canada for one on RCC. It's an important topic area. It can actually have tremendous impact on treatment access down the line. So I encourage you all to hop onto that webinar, to register for it, and join us then to that discussion with Howard Lim, Alex Chambers, and myself.
Thanks, Bob. Just the last comment that people probably saw pop up. One of our participants wanted the funding algorithm webinar to happen last week. So we need to be timely with these webinars as well. I have to say, CanCertainty is really pulling out all the stops to be the mechanics of the good ship Canada, to try to actually either rebuild it or do something on it. I know there are other campaigns out there that are trying to make sure cancer is a priority, and that we know that we need to invest more in cancer more generally. The approach that CanCertainty is taking is to really pull in the right experts that know the system, to your point, Judy, that are sort of live in it or have lived in it. So just thank you so much again for your expertise today. I'm going to put on the overalls and do what I can in my area of expertise. And Barry, I know we're going to be seeing you again soon. And Bob, thanks for driving this forward as a leader at CanCertainty. And for everyone on the line, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Hope you can make it out again.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.